Good day, everyone. Today we have Vladimir talking about OpenChain.
Great. So thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining. This is my first time at BalCCon, not only as a speaker, but also as an attendee. So thank you to everyone who managed to overcome the hangover from the rakia yesterday and showed up. And thank you for the organizers for showing interest in this talk. I will talk about OpenChain and supply chain, compliance and security in general. And I would first like to preface this talk a bit that compared to the other talks we have seen over the last few days, this one might feel a little bit more on the corporate side, not because I want to sell you some vendor tooling or whatever. I promise I don't. All of this is open source, it's freely available, but rather because it's about the supply chain, and well, companies are the primary interested parties when it comes to supply chain. So who am I? I am a lawyer by training. I spent a few years working at law firms on IT, intellectual property, data protection, that sort of stuff. But I'm also a programmer because while I was studying at university, I thought it would be really interesting to try to automate legal and compliance work. That didn't exactly pan out. Lawyers still exist, but it eventually led me to Bosch. Where I am now part of the open source program office of the company. So what I do essentially is I help teams in the company to use and contribute to open source. I do some compliance trainings. I help the management understand why open source is important and should be supported, that sort of thing. I work on open source management at the Automated Driving Alliance, which is a joint project between Bosch and Volkswagen. And I'm also a committer on the Eclipse Apoapsis project, which is an Eclipse project meant to create a process and reference implementation of software composition analysis at scale. And I'm also kind of interested in the cloud and AI, so I got a few certifications there. Okay, so, whoops, why are my slides not working? Technical difficulties. Okay, I don't know what happened. Okay, so just a short disclaimer. You will probably see on some of the slides the logo of the Linux Foundation. I'm not financially supported by the Linux Foundation. They're not paying me to be here. I don't represent them. But OpenChain is a Linux Foundation project, and this is the logo that's part of the standard slides that can be used and adapted. Okay, so first, let's talk a bit about the case for why you would want to manage open source in the supply chain. There is a report from 2022 available on the Linux Foundation website, which found that in vertical software stacks across industries, open source penetration ranges from 20 to 85% of the overall software used. So what this means, if you think about it for a bit, is that regardless of what area you're working on, if you're working with software, odds are that half or even more than half of the software that you're using is open source. So that means that there is a lot of value in that, but it also means that you would need to pay some attention to compliance and security topics. And this is our mental model, so to speak, of the supply chain. So you have some players, you have a supplier who develops some solution. Maybe they also have a piece of hardware. They take open source from the open source world, and then they have a customer. They give that component to their customer, which also comes with some documentation, and then that customer does some things and passes on to their customer and so on. That's at least the mental model, but this is the actual supply chain. It's a bit messy, so to speak. And we actually need to really think about just how valuable open source is, because this is not very easy to quantify. But there was a study by the Harvard Business School It's a bit lengthy, but it's written in a very accessible way, so I would encourage you to check it out. Which found that the supply side value of widely used open source is around 4.15 billion, and the demand side value is 8.8 trillion. So what those numbers mean, supply side, demand side. So supply side would mean if all the open source software disappeared tomorrow, how much would it cost to recreate all of it? And they came up to 4.15 billion. And demand side would mean if open source just didn't exist as a concept, and every company would need to create all of these components on their own, how much would it cost? And it's a ridiculous figure. I don't know who can afford that. And by the way, so they used some value substitution analysis where they compared the open source code to comparable proprietary solutions, and they used data from scanning tools. So they did not include in these. So it's an underestimation because they didn't include in these numbers or operating system data. So if you also include Linux and its distributions, it goes a bit up, a lot up. And okay, so we know open source is prolific. We know it's valuable. And how does the compliance and security picture look like? There is a report by Black Duck, which provides some scanning solutions that found that. So the 2025 report found out that 97% of repositories that were scanned used open source. 56% had some kind of license compliance issues, and 86% had security issues. And by the way, the previous version of this slide actually quoted a 2022 report, and since then the numbers have only gone up. And so inevitably, if you don't care about security as well, but also compliance, you might end up in a situation where you get sued for non-compliance. And these cases happen. They can happen because some company maybe has some business model that relies on open source, and you didn't follow that the obligations of the open source license. It might happen because of one of the groups that care about open source enforcement pushed this. By the way, I really like that these groups exist, because if companies don't abide by these licenses, then what's the point? So we need to have those who are interested in actually enforcing the licenses. So we needed to improve trust in the supply chain. And that's actually how things emerged. So there are actually two projects that emerged from all of that. One is the SPDX project for the software package data exchange, and the other is the OpenChain project, which I will be talking about today. So let's talk about OpenChain and the standards. As I mentioned briefly earlier, OpenChain is a Linux Foundation project whose vision is a trusted supply chain, and the mission is to make that happen, easy enough. Everything that the project creates, so standard, community, reference material, is in service and purpose of this mission, and the outcome would be that this supply chain compliance and security becomes cheaper, faster, and more efficient for everybody. The way that the project works is if there is a topic, we study it, we brainstorm, then we might make a guide if it makes sense, a specification if it makes sense, and finally a standard if it makes sense, plus quite a bit of supporting reference material. OpenChain is actually a high-level process management standard. This is how it would interact with other projects you might have heard of. So OpenChain is on the highest level, focusing on process management standards, guides, reference material. Then there are implementation standards developed in SPDX, and in the Chaos project and the To-Do group, there are some implementation guides, reference material, metrics, that sort of stuff. The two standards that came out of OpenChain are ISO 5230, which is for open source license compliance, so that was the first one. And then later it was developed the standard for open source and security assurance. As I mentioned, these are high-level standards. They are meant to be simple, effective, kind of lightweight, so that they can fit to all company sizes in all markets, and they're developed in the community and they're freely available. And by freely available, I really mean freely available. So yesterday we had a talk about standardization, where it was mentioned that the ISO standards are usually behind a paywall because it's a publisher, they need to make money, that's the business model. This is actually not the case with the OpenChain standards, because they were developed in the community and they were then pushed as ISO standards. So if you want, you can check them out for free. You don't need to pay. Or you cannot check them out exactly the same, but in a functionally equivalent documents. So OpenChain standards are the international baseline for quality and open source license compliance and security assurance programs. Here you can access them if you would like to take a look. They are very short documents, only a few pages long. They're quite flexible, so they focus on why and what you need to do, not how and when to do it. Essentially, the standards require the creation of a license compliance or security assurance program, and they can be scoped. These programs can be scoped either for a product line or a part of your organization or your whole organization. Essentially, they require that the program be properly resourced and staffed, and that the participants in the program be trained, and at the end that certain documents be generated, such as SBOMs. So they are focused on inflection points. So, for example, what you need to do when you procure software, what you need to do when releasing software. Does your company contribute to open source? If so, does it have a policy for that? That sort of thing. But the content is not defined. Maybe I should say a few words about the security assurance one, because this is, after all, a security conference. The security assurance in this context actually means or actually focuses on having a way to find out about known vulnerabilities and acting on this information. So you release a piece of software and then you monitor it, for example, and then you monitor it for any known vulnerabilities that pop up, and then what do you do if you inform your customer and that sort of stuff. There's two ways you can adopt the standards. One is the self-certification way. So this is basically, you go through a checklist. It's also available on the website. You go through the checklist that says, yes, we have this, we have this, we have this. So you need to figure out if you are compliant to those requirements, and then you need to, which includes producing some verification material for that, and then you need to advertise the fact, and you say to the world, yes, we are OpenChain 5230 compliant. The reason self-certification makes sense for the OpenChain standards is because they are meant to make companies keep records about the details in which they certified for each point, so verification materials and in the standards lingo, and because they are designed for the supply chain. The implication is that your customer can ask, if you claim you're OpenChain compliant, then your customer can request these documents and see how you arrive to the conclusion that you're OpenChain compliant. And this has proven quite effective, since no purposeful attempts to cheat the system have been reported since it launched in 2016. But if you are in a more regulated environment and you prefer third-party certification, then there's also certifiers who do that if you need it. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the supporting regulation. So OpenChain standards require you to use SBOMs. So they are also flexible enough to meet any requirements that the US may develop around the SBOM use structure or format. They also address some of the requirements of the CRA. For example, they already required record keeping before the Cyber Resilience Act made it into a requirement. So if you then if you adopt these standards, then you're already addressing some of the requirements that the CRA may impose on you. So what is the relationship with other standards? Well, there's wide compatibility. The OpenChain standards are essentially compatible with all compliance standards, security standards, SBOM formats that we are available. So the goal of these standards is to be very high level and very flexible. Okay, and finally, let's talk a little bit about the OpenChain community. So OpenChain is a project which has a single tier of membership. So these are the platinum members, which is the only tier. These are the companies that sit on the governing board, so they decide on the direction of the project and the adoption of new standards. But that doesn't mean that you need to pay to play. The calls are open, the mailing lists are open. You can join, you can participate, you can make use of the material as community participants. There are quite a few verticals impacted by OpenChain, so this is just one example. Here you can see some popular companies in automotive, in banking, cloud, consumer, industrial. So there is really wide adoption on this standard. There has been some recent progress. These are some of the recent announcements for OpenChain compliance. The Korean some Korean companies really like the OpenChain standards, so that their adoption there is excellent. Chinese operating systems also have started adopting OpenChain. Some data point. So 31% of large German companies already use or plan to adopt the standard for license compliance. So this means that if your company is delivering software for these companies, they will ask you, do you have an SBOM? Do you have a disclosure document? What about copyleft licenses and so on? So you would need to have that in mind. And well, the best approach is always, if possible, to shift left and to already be aware of these standards and to try to implement them. Okay, so I also want to talk a little bit about the support network. This is an overview of the community standard and work groups. There are some core work groups, there are industry-specific work groups, community groups, and there are regional groups. And if you look at the regional groups, you would notice that when it comes to Europe, so there is a lot of presence in Asia, that's really good. But when it comes to Europe, there is a UK group and there is a German group. And that sat a little bit bad with me because this part of Europe where we are here is quite important for the supply chain. We develop a lot of software that gets used by Western companies. And so I thought, well, not just me, also with some other people, but we thought it would make sense to create a work group also for our part of the continent. It's called Meridian 22. So this is an early stage in the community. It's focused on what you can broadly call Central and Eastern Europe, meaning what the countries that sit between Germany and Russia. And we would like to have newcomers. So please, if this is interested for you, if you're based in this region, please join us. We would like to have a call next month. Yeah. Also a few words about why we called it like that, Meridian 22. So these days it feels like nobody wants to say they're Eastern Europe. So if you say Eastern Europe, people like to say they think you're not talking about them. So the meridian 22 is the 22nd meridian that passes from Finland down to Greece, and so that makes it easier. We already have a few people signed up on the mailing list from Poland, Finland, and Bulgaria. I am co-chairing the work group together with a friend of mine also based in Bulgaria. And in the next couple of weeks, we will have access to the OpenChain socials to promote to promote the group. So we're trying also to translate some posts from English to the relevant languages. So we already have someone who can translate from Bulgarian. I can obviously do that. There was someone who mentioned about translating into Greek, if there's someone here who would be interested also to translate into Serbian or Slovakian or Romanian, etc., that would be more than welcome. The 22nd meridian actually in Serbia passes next to the village of, just east actually of the village of Leskovac. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. It actually misses Bulgaria, yeah, but okay, whatever, it's good enough. So, finally a few words about the broader community, let's call it, or the support and the materials that it has to offer. So there is commercial support available for third-party certification, tooling, automation, legal providers. If you want that, it's not in any way necessary. It's not mandatory, but if you want to make use of these services, that's an option. OpenChain has free reference materials. So reference for training, for policy templates, capability model, some supplier relevant documentation, webinars, etc. So I will just now briefly go over them, some examples. So the self-certification checklist I mentioned is on the website. It makes it easier for you to self-certify if your company is OpenChain compliant. There are reference training slides that you can reuse. There is a free online compliance management training. I may be going a little bit faster through these slides, but all of this is available in the website and the GitHub. Training is also available. There is an open source policy template available. So if you're absolutely starting from scratch and you need some reference, something you can work with, you can take a look at the template. There is a compliance program maturity or capability model. So this is a really nice Excel file where you can go through essentially assessing how far along your organization is when it comes to open source compliance maturity. There are some explainers. So you can use these documents to explain to your C-suite, to your developers, to your sales team, purchasing team, etc., what this is about and why it's necessary. There are supplier education leaflets. So this is like a one email solution. This is really good. I really like this document. So it's 10-ish pages long. And essentially it outlines all the basics of why you want to care about open source compliance in the supply chain. There are some case studies you can read, and all of this is quite easy to find and understand. There is a reference library of more than 1,500 documents, and there are more than 100 webinars about open source management and governance. For the Meridian 22 group, we're actually now trying to invite an expert on the CRA to speak about the requirements and how it potentially overlaps with OpenChain. So please follow and participate. Our calls are open and publicly listed. We publish a recording of everything that is not explicitly under Chatham House rules. And we provide access to work groups, special interest groups, and local groups via the mailing list. So the mailing list is the main thing we would communicate over. And yeah, that's about it. Let's talk more. Please, again, if you are in the Meridian 22 area, let's call it like that from now, then and you see value for your company in this activity, please consider joining us. So let's have maybe a short Q&A if we have time.
Does anyone have any questions? Anyone at all? No. Okay, let's give Vladimir a round of applause, people.